Andy McCain interview, take one, marker.
With Dad's first marriage, I'm the number 2 child, the middle one. You got Doug, Andy, then Sid, and I'm Andy. I would have been about 5.5 when he left to go, and it was unusual because he came back because of the fire on the Forrestal, and then shortly thereafter he went back again. So I can remember him being around for dinner when he was in town, but they were doing so much training. He was doing a lot of flying, so he wasn't around too much. But you know, I saw him semi-regularly when he was in town. I was pretty young then. I think that would have been about maybe 4 years old. So I really don't remember that much. I've seen replays of it, and I remember that he was on Jeopardy because my mom had made a big deal about it, and I just thought it was pretty awesome as a little kid to think that someone who was actually on TV. Because back then TV was a rather big deal. So it was kind of fun, but that's about it. Doug was a good older brother. It's funny. He's a little more serious than I am. I'm a little more easygoing, and I think there was a stretch there where I was kind of a real pain in the neck. But he followed my mom's instructions, and when she would say keep an eye on him, he would. And sometimes begrudgingly, but he fulfilled his duties very well, and he was always very helpful to me. So, and he made things much easier for me, playing sports or, going to a new school. He had gone there already, so there was kind of at least a little bit of a pathway cleared in terms of people that I was familiar with and what to expect, how to find a classroom or something like that. And that was quite helpful too. I don't remember the day. In fact, I don't even know the time lag from when he got shot down and, for example, when my mom would have found out. I do know that at some point they sat us down and said that he had been shot down. What does stick out was I remember that they said he was alive. He had been captured. And that was an important piece of information for a young person because the last thing we wanted to hear is that your dad had been killed. So what we didn't know was how critical his condition was and how close to death he was. But I remember there was a lot of sadness. My mom was quite sad, but that was just, something that we knew could happen. You don't really know it to the magnitude when you're such a young person, but when you're, a pilot in the Navy off to war, these are real risks. He was really kind of an amazing person to me. He was very disciplined, and he was a very small man. I think he was maybe 5 feet 4 inches, but he was such an imposing presence. And I just remember that when he walked into a room, obviously because of his rank, but I think more because of his personality, he really commanded attention and respect. And he just seemed to have a way about him that was very stunning to me, his presence. And it was clear my dad very much wanted to please him, or more importantly, did not want to disappoint him. And I thought that was notable because, when you're a little kid, I just thought my dad was the coolest guy around. But he really demonstrated some real feelings, I thought, in terms of his behavior for my grandfather. She was pretty good. It takes its toll because you get very little information, and the information you get is very inconclusive. But she was a trooper. She was very dutiful and taking care of, my older brother and sister. And we were able to live a pretty normal life, I would say, as kids. We went to school, we had regular meals, we played baseball or whatever sports we were doing, and that did not get disjointed or disrupted. One of the things that was, unusual about my dad being gone is we lived in one town for a very long time. If he'd have been back stateside, we probably would have been transferred a couple of times during his captivity, but we weren't. So we were able to establish a real connectivity to that community, which I also think really helped a lot. And being in the Navy, they have a way of taking care of their own. So there were plenty of father figures around that would help if something, like if one of the appliances broke or something needed fixing or we needed extra rides somewhere. So I felt very fortunate. It was a pretty stable time from a young person's perspective, and I felt very loved during that whole time. My brother was astute enough. You could see that the news were that the war was still going on. I was pretty young. I wasn't paying that close of attention. To me, nothing else mattered materially other than I was told my dad is still alive. And so my mind was in a good place that even though he wasn't here and I and all of us missed him a great deal, I knew he was going to be okay because they said he was alive. I don't remember getting too hung up about, the anticipation of the next holiday. I just think it was more an issue of we were just trying to be as grown up as we could be dealing with the reality. That was really just an unfortunate time. We were at my grandmother's house outside of Philadelphia, and she had been out visiting some friends and had a car accident. And I remember the next morning we woke up to open our presents and my mom wasn't there. And it was a little surreal because we weren't getting the information about what had happened completely, other than, everything's gonna be okay. We're gonna go ahead and open our presents, and as soon as we get some more information, we'll let you guys know. My grandparents finally told us that she was in the hospital and she had a car wreck. But again, there were no significant details, and those kind of came over time. And when you think about what my mom and frankly all the families of these captured POWs endured, this was really just kind of an extra piece of very, very difficult news. And I just think it's a tribute to her that she was able to cope with it and really kind of be successful in her own right, and coming to terms with it, and not crying about it, but making the best out of a bad situation. She's a rock star. I mean, she's amazing, and she's it's easy to see why my dad fell in love with her. She's just, aside from being a very attractive woman, as a little person, you always think your mom's the prettiest one, and I definitely believe that. But she was just a very, very bubbly personality, real extroverted, could make a friend with anybody, was well liked by women and men. I just thought she was a lot of fun. I thought she was very smart. And she still does the crossword puzzle daily, and sometimes we'll compare notes. But she is great. That was again, from a little kid's perspective, that was pretty cool because everybody was familiar with the CBS News with Walter Cronkite. And I remember a guy named, I think his name was John Lawrence, was the person who I guess he was the reporter, and they brought their team. And they were filming us, and we were playing touch football out in the front yard, and they interviewed the kids, and they did a long interview with my mom. But they were really nice, and it was, everybody in the neighborhood saw the show because everybody watched the CBS News, and it was just kind of a good feeling the way that it mattered to somebody important that they wanted to talk about our dad. Dad was very supportive of all of us. Mom obviously was too. You know, the Navy was certainly an option. It was not discouraged, but he wanted to make sure that we got a good education, and our parents, I think, sacrificed a lot to allow us to get very good high school educations. And then it was, you know, it was understood, and it was certainly stated early that you're going to go to college. And, you know, a lot of my friends, college wasn't something that was treated as seriously as it was for us. And we never talked about it, but I never thought twice about it. I'm going to college, and then I'm going to have to get a job after I graduate. It was that kind of understanding. But no, I didn't feel pressure. Now, you feel pressure when you get in trouble or you misbehave. That's a different kind of pressure, but in general, no, it was fine. That was, it was March 17th. It was St. Patrick's Day, and it was a very special day. You know, we grew up outside of Jacksonville in a small town called Orange Park, and Orange Park was a very small town back then. It was maybe 8,000 people. I mean, it hadn't even hit the 10,000 people mark. And so everybody in town was well aware of our family situation, specifically Dad. And so when he was coming back, there was just a ton of excitement for Dad being back, for all the prisoners coming home, and for our family. So we went out to the base, and we're on the tarmac, and we could see a bunch of friends out there that had come out with their posters, and I saw people that I knew, and I just, you know, the magnitude of that starts to kind of wash over you like warm water, and I'm like, wow, this is really a big deal. And then he got off the plane, and my mom was just beside herself because she was just so anxious to see him. And he looked great. He looked skinny. I mean, that was kind of the first thing I thought of. But you know, we all gave him a big hug, and it was really quite special. It was interesting. He seemed a little battered physically, and you know, I think you've probably seen a picture or two where his front teeth were a little messed up. But in terms of, they let us visit, they had to do a physical on him when he got back. They took him to the hospital, and they had by hospital standards, they had a very nice room for him, and he had to spend the night. But we all got to sit and chat with him for a few hours, and he seemed really good. And he was, you know, one thing that I always marveled about my dad was he spoke very matter-of-factly about his experience in Vietnam. And I never sensed bitterness. I never sensed this clinging to the past. And I've found that incredible, that there wasn't just this giant resentment from losing, you know, 5 to 6 years of your life, and kind of can't do a thing about it. But to the contrary, I remember he just felt like the future had so much more promise, and he wasn't going to let what happened to him bring him down. You know, for a small little town like Orange Park, this was kind of a big deal. So he was Grand Marshal of the, I think it was the July 4th parade, and so we all got to ride in the car with him, and that was a lot of fun. And he was, you know, he was what I would call a mini celebrity. I remember the mayor of Jacksonville gave him a key to the city, and I remember I did not go to the ceremony, but in our den, I saw this box with the key in it. And I'm like, where'd you get this key? And he goes, oh yeah, they gave me the key to the city. And I was like, what does that mean, the key to the city? And it was, to me, I thought it struck me as funny. I mean, does it unlock something? And but he was great, and he goes, no, they made a nice ceremony, and the mayor was very gracious, said a lot of nice words, and my mom said it was a beautiful ceremony. So, but it was things like that. And you know, the one thing that always tickled me as a youngster was, this was back, you know, in the early 70s, and there weren't a lot of restaurant options in Orange Park, and like it was like the beginning of fast food restaurants opening, and there was a Hardee's there, and we went there to go get dinner to take it home, And somebody found out who it was, and the manager gave him his meal for free. They just asked him to sign the receipt. And he looked at me, he goes, "What do you think of that?" And I go, "Can we come here all the time?" And so it happened to us a couple other times at different places to eat, and Dad was so great, because I was the one who clearly got the biggest kick out of it. And he said, "We got to find some more places to go. We're running out of places." And I said, I'm on it. And so he was a good sport about it. And he was always so gracious. Even back then, when people wanted to come up and say hi or shake his hand, he just really treasured the fact that people were thankful for what he did. And that really, I think, was enough for him in terms of that the effort was worth it, that people demonstrated that kind of affection. The Navy gave, I think most of the guys, I don't know if it was the same, but they gave them a very extended leave, just to give them a chance to be with their families, to kind of get some R&R and kind of get their body in a better state, mentally and physically. So, he became the head of the household quickly. And that was a bit of an adjustment because, my brother and I had long hair, and, my long hair looked so stupid, and I see those pictures and I'm thinking like, why did I care about this long hair? But he was like, it just needs to be well groomed. But we do have expectations in terms of chores. And so it was fine, but it was a bit of an adjustment. We kind of were doing our own thing there for a little while, and you get comfortable doing your own thing. But other than that, no, he was great about if there were things around the house that needed to be done, he made sure they got done. And I think it was probably harder for him because he's just now been inserted into a house with 5 people, and there are a lot of different personalities, and we're not maybe quite as sensitive to what he had endured because, again, we're kind of young kids, but it seemed to go fine. He never brought it up. He was really, it was interesting to me because if you asked him a question like, what was it like when they tortured you? He would answer and say like, well, it was really rough. And I asked him like, well, what would they do? And one time he told me, he goes, well, they would tie my arms up behind my back and they would hold them there and my legs would also be tied. And I was, it was amazing. But he wasn't unwilling to talk about it. He really wasn't interested in bringing the subject up. And I thought that was very interesting. Sometimes a friend would come over and they would ask him a question, and he would answer it, maybe not to the level of detail that would accurately describe the situation he had just left, but he would answer it. And I always thought that was great. We're all faced with our mortality at some point, and he is no exception. He's getting a little reflective on his life, and he's accomplished so much that I hope he doesn't worry too much about things that he didn't accomplish or things that were left unsaid, because there's way too much to be happy about and to dwell on in a positive way. I know that the timing of when all it happened, but I don't know kind of the genesis of when they started drifting apart. I do know that it was important for him. He wanted to be able to fly again. So the Navy was accommodating. They sent him to the War College up in DC, and then he did very aggressive physical therapy to get his body back in shape. And so he was able to do that. And we went back to Jacksonville again. So we were, again, able to go back to where we had lived for so many years. So that was nice. But as Dad progressed, then he went to be the liaison for the Senate. And I think he got a real bug for politics there that kind of was always simmering beneath the skin. And I don't know at that point kind of what was putting the wedge between him and my mom, except that he was gone a lot. He was doing a lot of international travel. and it was putting a little stress on the marriage because, Mom was dealing with a lot of the issues at home, with kids and those kinds of things. And so at some point people decide to part ways, but the details are not super available to me. It was extremely bad news from an emotional standpoint for all of us. It was just it was information we never dreamed we would hear, that our parents were getting divorced. And the worst part of it, I think, was how much it hurt my mom. And it really bothered her for a very long time. And I just think that, time ultimately heals all wounds, but this wound took a long time to get over. I came to terms that if I was going to have a continued relationship with my dad, I was just going to have to forgive him, regardless of what he was going to do with me. And when I did that, really trying to take a strong Christian position on that, I immensely felt better. And then over time, our relationship started to improve. But I just think if you don't do that at some point, and it's a very hard thing to do when the wound is still real raw. But if you don't do that, it just makes reconciliation impossible. And it's easy to be extremely bitter, but I just think if I can't affect his behavior, or frankly anybody's behavior that I'm at odds with, it's just going to make me feel bad. And at some point, I don't want to feel bad anymore. So, I forgave him. That was a difficult time as well, because that kind of just reinforced the wound that had just been opened. And it seemed very sudden, and it was kind of like just dropped on us as a kind of a piece of news. And oh, by the way, didn't I tell you? And it was kind of like you almost don't know what to say. But he had made the decision, and they were already divorced. So I just kind of chalked it up to, well, what else are we going to hear? And again, emphasizing, I just think it just piled a little more of that burden on my mom for having to deal with a very difficult situation. I wouldn't say he treated us differently. The contact shortly after that, the divorce and the remarriage, was, for me, very minimal. And that was partly by my choice. I was angry, and I didn't have anything to say that was going to be nice. And he would try. He would call, and if he was passing through town where we were, he would want to get together and have dinner. So the interaction became much less frequent. And then when he decided to get into politics, it was kind of like he had the blinders on, and it was full bore. And it was just not often that we talked to each other. But if I called him, he would take the call and we would talk about whatever. If I was up in DC or whatever, we'd get together. It wasn't like he didn't want to talk to us, but he was really focused on his political career at that point. I live in Arizona, so I got to see them a little more than Doug and Sid did. And, they were fun. They're so much younger, so it's, I guess technically you're a half brother, but, you're more like, at a minimum, an uncle or something like that. So it was fun to see them grow up. I wouldn't say we spent a lot of time together. But there'd be some functions. We'd be over at the house, or we'd go up to their cabin up north, and so it was. I think it was comfortable. There was. I would always kind of get tidbits because I work at Cindy's family's company, so I would hear things about what was going on. So I felt like I had a little connection there at least. It's called Hensley Beverage Company, and Cindy's dad started it back in 1955. And it's essentially we sell a lot of beverages, but our primary beverage is Budweiser and the Anheuser-Busch products. And that was something Mr. Hensley started back in the mid-1955, and it's been running strong ever since. They seem to get along very well, but Cindy's dad, Jim, was a wonderful man, and he was extremely friendly and very helpful, just the easiest going guy you would ever meet. You really wouldn't know, talking to him, that he had such immense business success. And I think he was proud of Dad. I think, he admired his work ethic. He admired kind of his intellect and his drive. And so, yeah, I think there was some genuine affection there. I think Dad got remarried, or I think it was 1980. And I would say that was when I was going to college. And then I got my MBA after that. So that was about a 6-year period. I would say around the end of graduate school. So I would say shortly after that, I came to terms that, this is the way it's going to be. So I can enjoy it or not enjoy it, but he is my dad, and I do want to see him more often. So that's kind of when that happened, roughly. The first time I came to Arizona was when I believe he ran for Senate and won. I had been out prior to that, but it was during the summer when he was on vacation, and we went on a trip. But something campaign specific was when I came out when he won in '86. I don't know what the general rule is for family members when one of your parents is running for president. We were all available to help if needed. And personally, there's no reflected glory for kids from a first marriage of a dad who's running for president. I was very proud of my dad. I really wanted him to win. I thought he would have been a great president. And so there were a few things that I did where I would speak to groups, but it was really quite minimal. I think it's a fair statement, and I think if he was being candid, he would say so. But it's really quite an admirable quality. He has basically given his life to serve, and I don't know if that was his plan, when he started out, but man, once he got into that kind of mode, he gave it everything that he had. And so, do I think he could have spent a little more time with us and been a little more engaged at times? Sure. But, when you choose to be a pilot in the Navy and you're at war, okay, that's, your services are needed elsewhere. And then when you follow another service path of being a politician, the demands on your time are incredibly hard or high. And I just think he made a decision: if I'm going to do the best I can to do this job to the people of Arizona's satisfaction, I've got to get everything I can. And that's hard not to respect. But I do think it was, at the sake of maybe other things he could have been doing with his family. The most attractive John McCain as a candidate is when he's really kind of that maverick personality. And I don't know that he's a maverick per se, because he's essentially very conservative in most of his beliefs. But he always demonstrated to me a strong willingness to do what he thought was right. And sometimes that was not popular within his own party. And I just think that can take a lot of courage for a politician sometimes, to kind of rankle your colleagues. But for Dad, it was about a higher purpose. And so now you kind of come full circle to he's nearing the end of his political career. And for example, on the healthcare bill, he took a stand, but it wasn't like he came out of nowhere to do that. He made it clear. He goes, if the two sides will not talk to each other, it's going to be very difficult for me to resolve, to support it. And so when that happened and he didn't support it, people were aghast. And it was kind of like he was being John McCain. And I just think he made it clear. He goes, look, come together. He goes, I think you can get something done. And I want to approve something. But I think that's, aside from being noble in the approach, I think it's appropriate behavior. I mean, he just loves telling the stories about how Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, they just sat down and they figured out a solution to Social Security, even though they both were really kind of possessing divergent opinions on it. But he said it was the willingness to work together. He said it's amazing the things you can get done when both sides are willing to give in just a little bit. And I think he'd like to see that come back instead of the rancor that exists now. He's, you got to hand it to him. I mean, he's just, even now that, he's in his 80s, it's like everything he kind of stands for is to make this country a better one. And I just don't know many people that really not only believe that, but every ounce of their energy is directed towards that. And I'm really proud of him for that, because I think it's a testament to his personality, and it's fun to see him really kind of back to his, he goes, if I don't do it, nobody will attitude. And I just think it's inspiring. And hopefully it pushes that kind of conversation forward enough to where we can start coming back to a semblance of civility in terms of trying to get legislation accomplished. We knew he had been sick, and they told us he's got to have these regular exams because of his melanoma issues. And they found something, and they said, we were told that they got to do a little procedure. They got to clean this thing out, and it was above his eyebrow. I think it's his left eyebrow. And so they had that scheduled. And then after that is when they determined this was something much more serious than what they thought. And then Cindy, who has been great about keeping us informed of kind of medically what's been going on with Dad, let us know. And they said they don't know what it is. They're not worried yet. And then when they got in there, they knew what it was. So they were certain. And then it was the glioblastoma and the consequences of that. So that was a little rattling, but classic Dad, he just said, let's find out, let's get the best care we can, and let's attack this thing with full force. He's not prone to feel too sorry for himself. I mean, and he easily could. I mean, you consider his medical condition, but I can remember, and this was recent, and I asked him, I said, how you feeling, Dad? And he goes, fine. He goes, I got to get back to D.C. We got to get that defense bill done. And he was really adamant about it. And he said, it's really important. He goes, we can't be wasting time. We got to get this done. And I'm thinking, it's such a typical Dad. It's all about for the greater good. I know it's coming, and it's hard to think about it in those terms. I think what I'm gonna miss is his personality. He really, I mean, ever since I was little, he's a very magnetic person, and people gravitated to him, and they gravitated to him and my mom. And he's engaging, he's a great storyteller. One of the things when they were POWs, to kill time, or to pass time, maybe that's a better way to put it, they would tell stories. And he would tell us some of these stories from the Wild West, and we would be like on 2-hour car rides, and these stories would last the whole ride. I mean, it was fascinating, and you were just kind of consumed with kind of what's going to happen next, and he played it out and told you about the characters. And so I will miss moments like that, but I will just miss knowing that he's out there kind of protecting the free world. And I don't want to be melodramatic, but I really think he has served that role very well for a very long time. And just seeing him and having that comfort and that assurance that he's doing that, I will definitely miss that. He's the geezer, and it's so funny because I think it's a great name because, you know, nobody's kids call the grandparents the geezer, and he just thinks it's perfect. And you know, I think some people like my wife and some others are like, you can't call him the geezer. That's just so kind of demoralizing. And I'm like, no way, he loves it. That's what, and they just say, hey, geezer, how you doing? And, you know, he goes, good, good, good. And he plays it up a little bit.